Welcome back, Agriscience students. We're going to finish up the animal science unit with looking at some tools that are related to animal science. You've seen some of these down at the barn. We've used some of these down at the barn, but some of these we have not. So just to kind of make you familiar with some of the tricks of the trade and the tools that we actually use in animal science, let's talk about a few of the ones that are most used in the animal science industry. So the first one that we're going to take a look at, this is a castrator. And we've mentioned this in class in cohorts A and B. So if you are actually on campus, one of the classes actually got to be there while we were doing a castration on one of the goats down at the barn. But basically, the use of a castrator is going to be to make a male animal sterile. It's going to be for either cutting off and removing, or at least cutting the circulation off to the testicles of the male. This particular type of castrator is an elastrator. There are other types as well. We have one that's called a Burdizo, which actually crimps the cords from the testicles to the penis. And this elastrator, though, is essentially going to cut the circulation off. Those of you who are on campus, if you remember the little buck goat that kept getting into everywhere, the one that we called Airhead, we actually used an elastrator on him because the person that was taking him home did not want to use him for breeding purposes. So this particular one is exactly like what we used. We took these little rubber bands that are about the size of a Cheerio and actually use this tool to stretch out those rubber bands and put it around both testicles, and eventually the circulation was cut off, and that eventually just dried up and fell off. So that's how we actually castrated that one particular animal. So that's one of the tools that we use in animal science that you may have had an opportunity to see at the barn. Another one that we use, but we don't typically do here, is dehorners. We don't really like the process of dehorning because we want to make sure that we're getting everything. So typically we send our babies to either the vet, or we have a lady that actually helps us out and we do some of the dehorning. We pay her to do it. It's just because we don't want to do it because we want to make sure that we're getting everything, because it is a painful process for the animal. So we want to make sure that we are removing everything the first time. So we don't want to screw it up. But this is actually going to remove the horns from cattle and other animals as well. For us, in our case, it's goats. And this particular type is actually going to burn the horn bud off before they've had a chance to grow really big. But there's other options as well, like a chemical paste actually would just kind of dissolve them off. This is an ear tagger. A lot of times this is used with, sometimes it's used with goats, but a lot of times it's used with cattle as a secondary means for identification. A lot of times animals are tattooed, and then the tag is put on there and actually just kind of reiterates what the tattoo says, so that makes it easier to see from far away. We do not ear tag our goats. We tattoo them so that we can, it's a permanent means of identification, but the ear tag is actually just going to put that plastic tag in the ear of the animal so that you can tell who's who from far away. Fence pliers are going to be used to build and repair fence staples, fence wires. This can be used kind of as a prying tool, and this side over here can actually be used kind of like a hammer. And then you've got your crimping tools here. So it's kind of a multi-use type of tool. And you're going to use it with this fence staple, and that's just to help to nail up wire, whether you're using hog wire, chicken wire, or whatever. This helps to staple that to a pole. We don't typically use this, but in some livestock industries, they actually do. This is what we call a rail grow gun. We don't use a rail grow gun, an implant gun. It helps to inject growth hormones into animals. It also can help to inject other types of medications and vaccines and things like that into animals. But this is done on a fairly quick basis. The animal would go into a head shoot or a squeeze shoot. They would be shot very quickly with the hormone, and then the next animal would be pushed up into the chute. So it's a fairly quick way of being able to medicate a lot of animals in a fairly quick and a time-efficient means. So this picture is actually not of a candler. This picture is actually of an egg that's being candled. We have a candler in the shop, and if you're in cohort A or B, we'll see if we can have a chance to take a look at it. But basically, when you are candling an egg, you're trying to look inside the egg. When you want to see if the inside of an egg is fertile and growing, like maybe you're trying to incubate an egg, or if you want to see how old an egg is, or if you want to see if there's anything that's kind of gross in an egg that you don't want to eat, we actually use a candler, and we can see through the shell and we can see things inside. So this particular egg right here, this looks like some sort of a blood spot or meat spot that's in this egg. It's kind of hard to tell with it just being on a picture and not moving. But this would be an egg you probably wouldn't want to send to the grocery store. So once eggs are laid in a layer facility, they go into a candling room, and there's somebody in there that just kind of eyeballs everything as it's going over a lighted table, and they can tell whether or not eggs are going to be grade A eggs that can be used for the grocery store or not. Or if you're in a situation where you're actually hatching eggs, you can candle to see what stage of development the actual embryo is, if it's growing. So candler is used to, it's just a very bright light. You can actually make a candler with a flashlight and a shoebox, but it's just a very bright light used in order to be able to look inside of an egg. Insemination rods and straws. So recently we've been doing some breeding down at the barn with our goats. All of our animals are going to be what we call live cover, meaning that we put the male and the female together for breeding purposes. Sometimes, though, you might not have a male on farm, or you might want to get some new genetics, or you might want to get some better genetics. And so what can actually be done is use an artificial insemination. You literally can ship semen from other bulls across the country, across the world, in a liquid nitrogen tank to your farm, and actually breed your animal to that bull they've never seen. We can do that with our goats. We've not had a lot of success with doing artificial insemination with our goats, but we've tried. We just don't have a whole lot of success with it. But this insemination rod helps to, it's basically a metal rod, and there is a plastic tube on the end of it that contains the semen that's going to be thawed out after it's been in the liquid nitrogen tank, and it's going to be inserted into the female, and then hopefully you have babies 9 months later, or 5 months in the case of our goats. A microscope, I'm pretty sure you probably are familiar with a microscope. Typically, in the case of animal science, we use it to examine sperm for artificial insemination to make sure that they're viable before we actually do the artificial insemination. Or it's also used to look at parasite loads on animals as well. So lots of different uses for a microscope. But typically in the animal science world, that's what you're looking at is parasite load, potentially even looking at blood samples and things like that. But lots of different ways to use that as far as veterinary science goes. This is a liquid nitrogen tank. This is used to store those little semen straws. And it can be, this particular one is not a shipper. This is one that would stay on the farm. This is a large, heavy one. We do have one of these, but it's not something that we just carry around with us all the time. You can get shippers that are smaller, that are not nearly as heavy, that can go across the country to ship those semen straws to somebody. This is one that would stay on the farm and would store a lot of semen straws at the time. Keeps it many degrees below zero, and then you just have to thaw them out. Basically, they're cryogenically stored until you get ready to use them. And not so pleasant, but this is one that we use fairly often. Ours is not like this, though. This is still one of those old mercury thermometers that would be glass. We tend to use the digital thermometer just like what you would use at home. We just use it for a different purpose. Most of the time when you need to take temperature for an animal, they're not going to open their mouth and let you stick the thermometer under their tongue. Also, those little guns that we're using as you come into school and taking the temperature off your forehead don't necessarily work for animals either. So we have to take their temperature rectally and normally we just do it with a digital thermometer. But different animals are going to have different normal body temperatures depending on the animal itself. But we do from time to time, if an animal just seems like they don't feel well, pretty much our first step of recourse is to take their temperature and see what's going on there. Syringes and needles, so we use these fairly often for different things. Sometimes it's blood draws. Normally, when we're doing a blood draw, it's something like a pregnancy test. We can do pregnancy tests with goats, and we send off the blood and have it tested in a lab, and it tells us how far along that they are and how much hormone they actually have in their system. Or we use it to give them medications and vaccines. So lots of use of syringes and needles in our livestock facility. And that is it for animal science tools. Make sure that you ask any questions if you have any, and that will finish us up for the animal science unit. I will talk to you guys again very soon.